You won't believe what this woman did the day she entered a mansion where 15 others had already failed. Housekeepers deserted that mansion one by one, some in tears, others in shocked silence, and more than a few still sporting the proof of their ordeal: streaks of blue paint, confetti in their hair, glue on their sleeves, or flower footprints along their way. It wasn't the gold sinks or the chilling silence of prosperity that pushed them out. No, it was something much diminutive, yet much stronger. Emma and Ella, 9-year-old twin children of millionaire widower Mr. Davidson. With their golden ringlets, sea green eyes, and porcelain skin, they seemed like painted angels. But beneath the nice girl facade resided the guile of two young ladies who had perfected the technique of scaring off anyone foolish enough to enter their sphere. Since their mother's accidental death 3 years before in a car wreck, the sisters had become impossible wise, savvy, and emotionally barricaded behind walls none of their elders had been able to breach. They didn't misbehave. Exactly. They executed full-scale psychological warfare. From plastic spiders in purses to booby-trapped pantries that spilled ice, cold water, to switched cleaning aids and screeching toys stuffed into beds, they pushed buttons until every worker snapped. Their dad, Mr. Davidson, had come close to giving up. A respected real estate tycoon, he was accustomed to negotiating tough deals and constructing towers that seemed to reach the clouds. But inside his own home, he was completely powerless. His girls wouldn't go to therapy, turned down every caregiver, and flipped their nose at every rule with the same smoothly perfect smile and immaculately practiced innocence. They're just misunderstood, he reassured himself again and again while resignation letters stacked up on his desk. Then his secretary called. "Sir, there's one more. My cousin happens to know her. Her name is Grace Williams." Desperate, he consented. And that's when she came. Grace, a black 42-year-old woman with gentle eyes and a subtle strength that presided over the room before she ever opened her mouth. She emerged from a faded blue Honda Civic that seemed utterly misplaced next to the Bentleys and BMWs parked in the driveway. With her practical shoes, tidy bun, and serene demeanor, she wasn't what anyone was expecting. But as soon as she stepped inside that front door, she noticed what no one else had. She did not look at the fine rug or gasp over the artwork. She saw the chipped stairs on the banister, the smudges of crayon smears behind a curtain, the glue-colored vase that had been hastily fixed. Like the chaos had become such a habit, no one bothered to do it right anymore. "They're creative," she said softly, her hand brushing over a scratch on the wall. Mr. Davidson blinked. "You're not joking?" he asked, unsure whether she was being sarcastic or naive. "I'm not," Grace said. "Destructive creativity usually hides something deeper, something unresolved." She sat down with him and listened. She heard the entire story, not only about the girls, but about Linda, the wife who passed away too early, and the family that hadn't laughed together in years. When Grace finally came face to face with the girls, they were in identical pink dresses, their hair curled absolutely perfectly, their smiles wide and gleaming. "Hello," Emma said demurely, offering a hand like royalty. "I'm Emma." "And I'm Ella," said her sister, cocking her head. They were picture perfect, not in the therapist's office. Grace just stared at them. A long silence. "Which of you came up with the glue on the door stunt?" The question wobbled Emma's grin. Ella blinked. No one had ever asked them about their antics like that. "We don't know what you mean," Ella replied, her tone all sugar. Grace smiled, really smiled, for the first time. "Sure," she replied softly. "You can keep pretending, for now." That moment, still, peaceful, and out of the blue, was the first moment that anyone didn't react to their act. The twins exchanged a look, something like concern flashing between them, because Grace didn't blink, she didn't scream, she didn't plead. And she didn't flee. She just stood there, unmoving as stone. "We'll see you tomorrow," she said, descending the sweeping staircase with the fluid grace of one who had entered into chaos previously and made it through. Mr. Davidson, waiting in the hallway, said nothing. He didn't realize it yet, but the woman who had just entered his home was different from the rest. She hadn't been there to clean. She had been there to stay and to mend the parts of his house that no amount of pay could touch. She did not present much to the world outside. Just Grace Williams, a 42-year-old black woman in a worn sweater, work boots, and a blue Honda Civic that wheezed as it crested the long drive of the Davidson mansion. Her own dark brown curls were tied up neat and out of the way, and her face was serene, too serene, some would have said, for a person who was about to enter the sort of house that had consumed and discarded more than a dozen housemaids within less than a year. But Grace wasn't fazed. When she got out of her car, she did not gaze at the marble pillars or the carefully trimmed hedges, or the sort of luxury that tended to make folks straighten their spines and lower their tones. She gazed at the windows, not the shiny glass but the smudges on the edges, the way one curtain was draping over a bit too far, as if someone had yanked it open too quickly and hadn't cared to adjust it. That told her more than a brochure could. Inside, Mr. Davidson loomed, waiting near the staircase, arms crossed, already tired and on his guard. His tailored suit was unable to conceal the slump in his shoulders, the indelible furrow between his eyebrows. "You have to be Grace," he said, voice clipped but courteous. "I don't know how much they informed you." She smiled, enough to be polite but not keen. "Enough," she said, putting down her bag at the door. "They said it's a tough job, but I've never seen a child tougher than grief." He blinked, not quite sure what to say to that. Most applicants talked about discipline and structure and strategies. None started with grief. He glanced at his secretary, who stood silently nearby, clutching the day's paperwork. "She's the last one," the secretary whispered under her breath. "If she quits, we're out of options." Grace nodded gently, as if she had heard that sort of warning before. She walked slowly through the foyer, taking it all in. The shattered frame on the hallway table, the crayon swirl's hat, erased behind a door, the faint smell of vanilla that seemed to hide something colder beneath it. Her hand trailed the banister, pausing at a gouge in the wood. She was silent for a long time, then looked at Mr. Davidson and said, "They're not bad children. They're hurting." The words stood there like fog, gentle but impossible to disregard. Mr. Davidson looked at her. "Everyone else just said they were wild, manipulative, little monsters." Grace nodded her head. "Wild is the tip of the iceberg. Look deeper. You'll usually find a wound that no one's tending to." He looked away, jaw tightening. "They lost their mother 3 years ago. Car accident. They were there when it happened." Grace's expression didn't change, and since then, no one stayed long enough to help them process it. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. She could read the answer in the silence, the way he shifted his weight uncomfortably, not wanting to acknowledge how much truth she'd unwrapped with one breath. Most people sidestepped the pain. They stuck to rules and chores and punishment. Grace, however, stepped right into it like it was a room that needed tidying. That's what set her apart. She didn't shy away from what was broken. She met it face to face. "Mr. Davidson asked at last, "Why do you want to work here? You've read the history." Grace smiled once more, weak but rich with something deeper. "Because I've been where they are. I know what silence after a funeral sounds like. I know what a locked door means when a child won't come out. I recognize the type of sound a home makes when all are acting like they're okay." For an instant, he wasn't going to say anything. Then quietly, he nodded. "All right, 1 week. If you survive that long, we'll discuss longer-term plans." Grace merely grabbed her bag and said, "I didn't come here to survive. I came to stay, if they'll have me." And with that, the atmosphere of the house changed. Not because Grace entered with solutions, but because she entered with ears perked, heart gentle, and eyes that didn't merely observe chaos, but purpose. She was the first grown-up to enter that manor and not fear what she would see. She was the first one to articulate aloud what no one else was willing to. These girls aren't behaving, they're grieving. She understood the wrecking as a dialect, one they'd learned to speak because no one had shown them how to say, "I miss my mom," and not be shut down or sent away. And what Grace did next, what she started, with nothing more than a broom in one hand and a soft voice in the other, would gradually alter the direction of their lives forever. Because this wasn't cleaning a house, this was healing a home. Grace encountered the twins that same afternoon, hours after she'd been employed, and as soon as they entered the room dressed in identical pink frocks, white bows in their golden ringlets, and identical bright smiles, she could tell right off. The smiles were terrific, practiced, the sort that made grown-ups coo. Aren't they just sweet? Grace wasn't buying. Those were not the smiles of contented little girls. Those were masks, built with a lot of thought from years of observing people coming and going. From mastering the art of disarming strangers before they could depart like everyone else. Grace observed them calmly as they sat on the couch, swinging their legs, folding their hands too neatly for 9-year-olds. "Which one of you came up with the glue on the door trick?" she asked calmly, her voice soft but firm. The query fell like a dropped plate. Emma blinked. Ella cocked her head. No adult had ever been so bold as to call them out so directly. Most ignored the jokes, attempted to discipline them, or just quit before day 3. Grace held her breath, unmoving. Just pretend for now, she shrugged, but I always managed to find out in the end. Then she smiled, genuinely smiled, not the type that expected something in return, only warmth. And then she got up, took a look around the kitchen, and started cooking dinner as if she owned the place. That evening, the girls schemed. The next morning, the storm hit. Before dawn, Grace had 5 instances of finding her vacuum unplugged while she vacuumed the rooms upstairs. When she opened the refrigerator, 3 doll heads placed on top of the yogurt were grinning with marker-drawn fangs. Toothpaste had been squeezed between pieces of bread and what appeared to be a peanut butter sandwich, and her soapy water bucket had been spilled on the steps in a mysterious way, but none of it fazed her. She plugged the vacuum in again. She smiled at the dolls, and when she bit the sandwich and found minty fluoride in place of peanut butter, she chewed, swallowed, and said, "You know, when I was a kid, we were so poor, I actually ate toothpaste for supper once. Brushed my teeth inside out." The twins were stunned behind the kitchen door, their eyes wide open. "She ate it," Emma whispered. "On purpose," Ella breathed. They peeked in, expecting to see her furious, maybe packing her bags, but instead, Grace was rinsing her mouth at the sink, humming an old gospel song like nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, she found them pretending to read in the hallway. She sat beside them, not saying anything at first, just flipping through a photo album she'd rescued from under a coffee table. "You're not mad about the sandwich?" Ella finally spoke, her voice a mere whisper. Grace turned to her with gentle eyes, the sort that had the ability to make you feel like you'd just been blanket wrapped in warmth. "Should I?" she questioned. "Or should I be asking why 2 little girls have to send people away first so they can be left behind?" Which made that question hang in the air like a held breath. The girls didn't respond. They didn't know how. No one had ever asked them that before. For 3 years, adults had labeled them as problems, too hard to manage, too unruly to train. No one had ever sat down and wondered why they misbehaved, or what they were trying to communicate without words. But Grace heard it. She'd been listening since she came in the door, and each prank, each trap, each eye roll and silent stubbornness, they weren't acts of rebellion. They were pleas for help disguised as mischief. Grace understood the language. She'd spoken it once as a little girl cowering in a closet when the yelling in her house became too much. She had used it when her mom had died too, and nobody paid attention to how silent she had become. That's why she didn't wince. That's why she didn't scream, because she wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was a survivor who knew the signs, and rather than fleeing from the storm like all the others who had come before her, she was marching headlong into it with arms wide open. It wasn't overnight, but gradually, so softly that it was nearly imperceptible at the time. The walls the twins had constructed started to develop cracks. Rainy Tuesday afternoon, thunder bumbling in the distance, and the aroma of tomato soup in the kitchen. Grace no longer worked alone. Little hands helped, Emma arranging slices of bread on a plate, Ella laying the cheese. No tricks this time, no traps, but silent cooperation, their eyes on her, waiting for approval, warmth. Grace did not make a scene. She merely smiled and gave each of them an apron. "These are genuine sandwiches," she teased. "No toothpaste permitted." The girls laughed, this time more lightly. Not mischievous, but innocent. That night after dinner, they didn't dash up to the rooms and act like they had something else to do. They remained in the living room, huddled up on the couch, questioning Grace about her favorite colors, childhood, whether she preferred dogs or cats. And then, so soft a whisper, Ella said, "Our mom had a laugh like yours." Grace glanced up, but didn't break in. She simply sat and listened, allowing the floodgate to open by itself. The twins started discussing their mother, not the facts, but the small things. How she would sing while folding the laundry, how the scent of her perfume lingered on their blankets, how she would refer to them as her sunflowers. Grace listened, her heart paining at each word. She understood what it was for them to be able to share this, and she understood how long they had to have been shouldering all that on their own. By week's end, things had changed. The house that had reverberated with slammed doors and mischief now rang with something. Gentler laughter, music, feet that didn't flee from but two. Even Mr. Davidson picked up on it. He stood in the hallway one night, observing from afar as his daughters leaned against Grace. Sleepy eyes waited with faces full from a home meal and the type of love they'd not received in years. He did not speak. He simply stood there, fists curled by his sides, tears ready to fall. Then there was the night that opened up Grace's heart. She was putting the girls into bed when Emma swiveled around to face her, wide-eyed and sober, and asked in a whispery voice, "Grace, do you promise you won't die like our mom did?" There was stillness in the air. The bedside lamp threw soft golden light over their faces, and time seemed to stand still in that instant. She sat down next to them, grasped both of their hands in hers, and squeezed them hard. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, her voice choked with feeling. "No one can guarantee that. I wish I could. But what I can assure you of is this. As long as I'm around, as long as there's breath in my body, you will know beyond all doubt that you are loved and safe and never alone." The twins didn't reply. They didn't need to. They inched over to her, their small bodies shuddering with suppressed sobs, their tears dripping onto her sleeves. Grace cradled them, humming that familiar gospel hymn she hummed whenever words failed her. In the hallway, half a mile away from the dim glow of a single nightlight, stood Mr. Grast Davidson. He'd gone in to wish them good night, but hung back when he overheard the question. He leaned back against the wall and swiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, chest rising and falling in quiet grief and relief. Undefined for the first time in 3 long years, he did not see his daughters as the specters of a woman he'd lost, as mad reminders of love taken from him, but as children again, undefined children who laughed Homeasap, who cried, who clung to someone because they were safe. Undefined just when healing had finally started, just when Grace's presence had woven peace into every room. Something else was going to rock the house, and this time, it wasn't from the inside. 3 weeks went by, and the mansion was abuzz with activity as staff hung up balloons, set tables, and made preparations for something it hadn't seen in 3 years, a birthday celebration for the twins. Mr. Davidson had resolved to go big, no holds barred, to give Emma and Ella the happiness they'd so long been deprived of. Laughter and chatter wafted through the mansion's great halls as neighbors, business associates, and socialites milled in, sipping champagne and snacking on hors d'oeuvre. The girls were dressed in identical yellow dresses, shining as they spun alongside Grace, who stayed close, leading them tenderly like a beacon in a tempest. It was lovely, until Patricia Whitemore showed up. She swept in like a whirlwind in pearls and scent, one of those women whose smile did not touch her eyes. Her high heels clicked harshly over the marble floor as she swept her gaze around the room, her voice laced with sugar and venom. "Are you certain it's safe to leave your silver in the presence of someone like her?" she whispered to another guest, just loud enough for them to hear. Grace, across from her, had her head down. She'd overheard it, all of the words, and worse was that so had Emma and Ella. The girls' light flickered, their faces changing in shame and perplexity. They attempted to carry on as usual, but their glow fizzled. Afterwards, out in the garden, Patricia's daughter approached them and snickered, "She's not your nanny. She's only after your daddy's money." Grace had trailed behind, plates of cake in her hands. She hesitated. She could have shot back, could have mortified the child and mother with a smart tongue and razor, sharp truths, but she didn't. She just smiled, turned on her heel, and left. That evening, the house was still, but tension smoldered beneath. Over in their room, the girls finally erupted. "Why didn't you tell her something?" Emma blubbered, her voice shaking with anger and pain. "She was insulting you." Ella joined in, her fists bunched. Grace perched at the edge of their bed, tranquil as ever, her voice gentle but firm. "Because individuals like her, they're scared," she explained softly. "Scared of losing what makes them feel special, so they attempt to make others feel less than." The girls glared at her, still angry. "But she made you sound like nothing," Emma breathed. Grace's gaze didn't flinch. "She doesn't know me, and her words don't define me, or you." There was a quiet in the room, the kind that precedes something that forever alters. Because what Patricia and everybody else didn't realize was that Grace had been quietly keeping records all along since the moment she got there. Not for revenge, not out of pity, but for truth. How the girls changed, how Mr. Davidson transformed as a father. How a house once filled with sorrow became one of laughter and light. And yes, even the words Patricia had spoken under her breath. 3 months after that, Grace stood on a stage in front of a national child development conference, no longer merely a housekeeper, but a speaker, an expert, a published author of trauma healing and family reconstruction. Her work had been recognized by universities, parenting networks, and national organizations. When her speech was done, she showed a short clip, audio from that fateful party, the sound of Patricia's own voice echoing through the room. "Are you sure it's safe leaving your silver around someone like her?" The room fell silent. Heads swiveled, mouths dropped open. There was no outrage, no pandemonium, only silence, the kind that is heavy with weight. That evening, Grace didn't go back into the mansion feeling shameful. She went back feeling purposeful. Emma encircled her waist with her arms and said in a soft whisper, "Now they all know who you are." Grace leaned over and kissed her forehead. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "Now they all know who you are. Brave, loved, and never ever forgotten." And from that day forward, nobody ever again dared speak of Grace as if she were merely a housekeeper, because she had become something much, much more. She was the one who made the unhealable whole, and she did it not with power or position, but with grace.